We are here again today gathered, and I have the pleasure to give you a very warm welcome to today's workshop in the Growing Resilience in Uncertain Times webinar series. I am Julika von Stackelberg, Family and Community Resilience Educator with Cornell Cooperative Extension in Orange County. And I am here today to welcome you all on behalf of Ginny Darling, who is the Executive Director of the Cornell Cooperative Extension in Delaware County, and who's also the Chair of the Delaware Rural Health Alliance, as she could not be here with us today. So this webinar is sponsored by Cornell Cooperative Extension in Delaware County and by the Delaware Rural Healthcare Alliance. So before we begin, I want to thank the ACEs Task Force, which is part of the Delaware Rural Healthcare Alliance, for identifying the interest for this particular series. And I also want to thank the CCE staff who have helped to put this together, and in Delaware County and also in Orange County for helping to spread help publicize, spread the word of the series. And then also thanks go to the Catskill Health Network and the organizations that are connected to the work that they all do. So thank you also to Child Savers in Virginia for working with us on this, and for John Richardson Loeb, who is our speaker today. And I will introduce John to you in just a moment. I just want to point out that he will also talk about a challenge that goes along with this series. So each of the sessions offers all of the participants, all of us, a challenge to participate in strengthening our own or building our own resilience. And you are all invited to participate, and I'm sure he's going to share some of the outcomes from last month's challenge on self-care, and then introduce to us the new challenge for this month. So, John is a licensed clinical social worker, and he has worked for over 25 years in this field of community mental health. He's committed to the support and strengthening of individuals and communities that struggle with adversity. And his experience includes work with chronically mentally ill adults, substance abuse, residential youth care, foster care, and outpatient mental health. And he's worked with homeless veterans in New York City, in a hospice home for those with HIV in the early stages of the AIDS crisis, and 6 years living together with, and he's been 6 years living together with his wife in a home with 8 teenage girls in foster care. And he is an experienced trainer, lecturer, and keynote presenter, presenting nationally as well as internationally. He's the director of mental health and the lead trauma and resilience educator at Child Savers, an outpatient mental health clinic which has served children and families in the Richmond, Virginia community for over 90 years. He and his wife have a 13-year-old son and have worked with over 50 children in foster care in their own home. So welcome, John, and thank you so much for today's topic on growing resilience in times of uncertainty while keeping everyone safe.
Yeah, because we can do that in less than an hour, right?
Totally. You can do it.
Julika, thank you very much for introducing me. If anyone ever has any self-esteem issues, just make stuff up about yourself and give it to somebody and have them introduce you, and you'll feel really good in the end. So we are going to have a speedy round today between now and the 55 minutes from now. And today's workshop is a complement for what we're going to do. We're going to do some follow-up work from last month. And then this is going to be a complement for what we're going to do next month. Today, we're going to focus on safety and resilience. Most of our time is going to focus on safety. We're going to do a little bit of overview of what we did last month, because it is definitely relevant. Then we're going to focus on safety. And that's going to be the majority of our time. And then we're going to touch on this resilience model. And the resilience model I love, but we can't be resilient if we don't feel safe. So we're going to talk about that, how that plays out for us all as we go through today. But next month is all about teaching resilience. So next month is going to be really important as a complement to this, because next month we're going to take today's resilience model and play it out. So this slide here, if you're not familiar with Zoom, you can change the proportions. If you want to look at the slide and not me, then you can keep the slide up, which usually is the default, but you can also swap that up at the top, or you can double click on my face. It depends on your interface. So feel free to do that to meet your own needs. I'll draw your attention to the link at the bottom there. It'll be on my last slide as well. But the link there in the bottom, childsavers.link/Cornell. If you want to sketch down that, scribble down that link, Karen is probably going to email it out to participants as well. But if you want to scribble down that link, and that will get you to a PDF of the entire PowerPoint that's here, as well as resources from last month and future months. My contact information is there. Feel free to let me know if there's anything that I can do to support you in the work that you're doing in your community. The Child Savers, the organization that I'm connected with, focuses on two things. One is children's mental health. We do a lot of work in the community. We have an outpatient clinic. We offer psychiatrist services. We also go into schools in our area and provide access to mental health care to children during the school day. So kids get that opportunity so they don't have to deal with the barriers that many of the children in our community deal with or encounter when they're trying to access regular mental health services. We also do crisis intervention services, where we go out in the community in moments of crisis and trauma and serve children and families after, for instance, some community violence, a shooting in the community, an assault, things like that. We'll go out there and work with those children and families, whether it's in the home, whether it's in the emergency room, wherever that might be. And then we also do a lot of work in child development services, working with early childhood educators to help them do a great job in what they do, because we know people in that early childhood space are the prevention program for kids, so that they don't have to come to us for mental health needs down the road, that we can do a lot of prevention work. This is the February challenge. It'll be on a slide later as well. But we invite you to that email address, cornellchallenge@gmail.com. We're going to invite you to email in something about your safety anchor. And it might be a picture, it might be a story. We had some really nice ones that were sent in this month. There were only about 6 in number that I was able to see. And we can definitely do better than that. So I challenge all of you to take a picture as we talk about today's work. Think about, what would your safety anchor be? How would you visualize that, or how would you tell someone about that? Could be a place, a thing, or even an experience. And send us a picture or a story to cornellchallenge@gmail.com. So those of you who were with me last month will remember that we did some Poll Everywhere live polling during the workshop. If you want to participate in the live polling, you can do it in 3 ways. You can take out your cell phone, and to the number 22333, you can text the word Child Savers. It needs to be all one word. Autocorrect oftentimes will put a space in the middle. You'll end up in somebody else's poll if you do that. So the destination number where you're texting it to is 22333, and text the word Child Savers, all one word. Alternately, you can open up a browser window on your device and go to pollev.com/childsavers, or you can scan the QR code that's on the screen and take a picture of that. These instructions will be on the top of every slide that has live polling on it. Okay, so feel free to do that. If you're not able to participate, if you can't figure it out, if it's too confusing, if you just can't make it work, don't worry about it at all. This is just an opportunity for you to give feedback in a different way than just putting things in the chat. It's also anonymous too, which sometimes can get us better results when people's names don't have to be tied to the results. Corinne, thank you for putting those links in the chat. That's going to really help people out. So remember, at the top of every page with live polling on it are those instructions, which are up there at the top. My first question is just a test question. Have you gotten a COVID vaccine shot yet? Nope, not yet. Yes, but only one. Yes, I've gotten both of them. I don't plan to ever get one. or I'll skip it. I'm skeptical. I'll probably get it, but no time soon. If you can't figure out how to work with the poll everywhere, feel free to put your answer in the chat as well. That'll be even more relevant for our future ones. Some got both. Excellent. Looks good. Good answers. Thank you so much for responding. Again, this is going to help us, and this is just a test slide, obviously. I go for my second one on Saturday, but it's forecast to snow here. And here in Virginia, we are afraid of snow, not like you hardy New Englanders and New York Staters. So I'm worried that that might keep me from driving my 45 miles where I have to drive to get my second shot in the snow and the freezing rain. So next question, what sector best describes your profession? We've realized as we've been doing this that we don't really know who's in the room. We know we have a lot of educators who are invited to this, but we don't really know the diversity that we have. So Jane says in the chat, it should, if you texted it correctly, it should say, welcome to John Richardson Loves, or no, welcome to Child Savers poll. And it's Child Savers with an S on the end. I see you typed in there without the S. So if you are in the something else category, those 17 people who responded down there, I invite you to put your profession or sector in the chat again, so we can kind of figure out who's here and know that for a balance for next time. A lot of people in education, which is great. 4-H camp, that's fun. Victim assistance, wonderful work there. Excellent. Thank you all for responding. Give another moment for people to finish up their responses. And again, if you can't get your answer in, no worries. Lastly, did you attend January's self-care workshop with us? Yes, or yes, and I watched the recording, or no. This is great. You all are really getting the hang of this. Looks like the recording was not popular, at least with this crowd. Maybe the same people who are going to watch the recording this time watched it last time and aren't here to claim that. Great. So, I want to go back and 16 were a no. So quick review, since most of you did attend. We talked about self-care last week. We talked about self-care inherently being something that you do for you. This is not what your boss does for you, what your partner or spouse does for you. It's about what you do for you. Secondly, it's about what works for you. Different things work differently for people in self-care, and there is no universal model for self-care. Some people need to upregulate, some people need to downregulate, some people need to do yoga and mindfulness and meditation. Some people for self-care need to go run 5 miles. Or lift heavy things, and that is okay. And thirdly, self-care is both a lifestyle. It is something that we need to incorporate into what we do in the fabric of our being and our regular routines, but it is also an event that I might have a rough day today, so I might engage in some self-care practices this afternoon. We talk about categories of self-care. Sometimes people think of distraction and escape type things as being self-care, things like going and watching Netflix, things like that. And that is not self-care. Oops. Self-care, sometimes people think of restorative things as being self-care, and that is not self-care either, quite frankly. Not that it's bad, but it's not self-care. What self-care is inherently, and this comes from the World Health Organization's definition of self-care, is it is maintenance. It keeps us doing what we're doing, and it's prevention. It keeps problems from happening. So if we look at this chart, self-care just keeps me at my baseline. Doesn't help me get above my baseline, just keeps me at my baseline. Every once in a while, we all encounter stress or trauma, and that sinks us down. And then that self-soothing or that that self-soothing and restoration that we talked about on the previous slide, that helps me get out of that trench, out of that ditch. And then it's the self-care, the self-care that keeps me on that baseline. So today we're going to talk about safety, and then we're going to talk about resilience, which helps me get better than baseline. We talked about building a self-care plan, and we talked about these 6 domains, these 6 elements that we need to use to build a good self-care plan. We had some really good answers. I remember we polled people, and 33% of you said that emotional self-care was the most important for you to function. That was a really interesting number. Unfortunately, only 8% of you said that you struggle significantly with emotional self-care. Again, great. 35% of you said that physical self-care is the one you struggle with the most. I found all these to be fascinating numbers, so I wanted to share them. So today we're talking about safety. So let's operationalize that. What is safety? What does it mean to be safe? Now, inherently, it's being away from a threat. It's really important to remember that that threat could be real or could be perceived. One of the things that we talk about in trauma-informed care a lot, and I'll extend this to these concepts of safety, is that safety is in the eye of the beholder. It doesn't matter how safe I think a thing is. I know that riding on a roller coaster at whatever 65 miles an hour and going on this drop that drops 20 or 10 stories, I know that that is a safe thing, that nobody's ever died on this roller coaster before, and I know that that's safe. That doesn't mean that somebody else doesn't get on that roller coaster and feel like their life is going to end. And safety is about that perception of threat, not just the reality of the threat. Both the real and the perceived threat. And if I am in a safe position, I'm away from that threat. But good safety also promotes regulation. It helps me to be a good regulated person, regulated in my mind and emotions and regulated in my body. Because things that are unsafe create dysregulation. It makes me to be anxious, scared, nervous. We'll talk about fight, flight, freeze. We'll talk about survival response in just a few minutes. But good safety is going to promote regulation. It's going to help me be a regulated individual. And then if I'm in a safe position, my fundamental needs are met. Things like food and water and shelter. Think Maslow's hierarchy of needs. My fundamental needs are met, which means that I can do things beyond this safe seeking position. We're going to talk about that today, this safe seeking position. We're going to talk about these safety anchors that I referred to earlier. So this is a great way to conceptualize safety. I really like this concept of a safety network. This comes from the work of Community Resilience Initiative out of Walla Walla, Washington, and has done a great job of sharing these concepts, as well as Lisa Feldman Barrett, who will be credited on the next slide, I believe, who wrote a wonderful book called How Emotions Are Made. Lisa Feldman Barrett, How Emotions Are Made. Again, her credit will be on a future slide. And she talks about these networks in our brain. And the most fundamental network that we have in our brain is our safety network. And that's why it's at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that we have to be safe and have to have our basic needs met. And that safety network in my brain asks a simple question: am I safe? And if the answer to that is no, then we go into survival mode. Hopefully we all know the basics of survival mode. This goes into good trauma-informed care training that I know many of you have been involved with. So I might engage in fight mode, which might be physical or verbal arguing. It's going to be about conflict. Fight mode is about engaging in conflict. Or I might engage in flight mode. Flight mode is about disengagement in conflict. That's about that disengagement. So that might be withdrawal, running away, hiding, things like that. That disengagement, that separation, that I don't want to be engaged with you. Now, interestingly, both fight and flight mode are things that we see. They're things that we take notice of, whether you work with kids or adults. They're behaviors that put up a flag, that put up that red flag to say somebody needs to pay attention to this behavior. And whether the behavior is dealt with effectively or not, that's a different question. But we at least pay attention to people who go into fight and flight mode. Freeze mode is a surrender, it's a dissociation. Those of you who are in mental health work, this concept of dissociation, going someplace else in my head so that I can survive this threat right now. Because these behaviors are adaptive in a lot of circumstances. People who constantly live in their safety network are people who have these fight or flight or freeze behaviors really ingrained in them. They've been reinforced many, many times. And it makes sense that if they have an unsafe environment around them, then it makes sense that they would go into these modes and go into them strong, because that's what might help them survive. Fight mode gets the enemy away from me. It lets me fight. Flight mode gets me away from the enemy, gets me away from that trauma. Freeze mode helps me survive something that I can't fight and I can't escape. Freeze mode helps me go someplace else, not physically, but mentally, someplace else in my head. Oftentimes can get confused for daydreaming and kind of just not paying attention, things like that. But it's really spacing out. It's really going someplace else in my head. And that's because I can't deal with, I don't want to be in my body for whatever the awful thing that's happening right now. So that freeze mode can oftentimes fly under the radar. And interestingly, freeze mode has a strong correlation with again, traumas that we can't run or fight from. Run from or fight. Things like childhood sexual abuse. Awful, awful thing, but kids oftentimes can't fight it and can't run from it, but they have to figure out how to survive it somehow, so they go someplace else in their own head. There are other, quite frankly, countless numbers of other ways that people talk about survival mode. Things like fawn or flop and others. Fawn is also called tend and befriend, where I'm trying to make the person happy and please them so that they won't attack me or hurt me, so that they won't be so much of a threat. Or flop, which is just a total collapse, physical and emotional and mental collapse, falling apart. So that's our body's arousal system, and that's how when we live in our safety network. So my question from you, many of us have a kind of a go-to with this. I know that I do. If you're in a moment of threat, which are you more likely to get into? Are you more likely to fight? Are you more likely to run? Are you more likely to just shut down? Or are you not really sure? And some of you may find it very interesting just to be asked this question. But one of the things as we work on strengthening our safety and reinforcing our safety is being introspective and knowing ourselves. And I've asked this question of countless people, and it's amazing how often people say, yeah, I'm not really sure. Like I'd really need to think about what I do when. I know that I am a runner. I have never quit a job because I went into this flight mode survival instinct, but I have wanted to quit many jobs. When I've gotten into a conflict with a peer or a supervisor, when I've had just too much workload on me, when I have a giant stack of paperwork that I have to deal with, and I've got a limited amount of time to deal with it, I've said, I could just leave. I could just push this aside and leave this job, and I might never get another job because I won't get a good reference, but I could walk away. I could do it. Again, I've never actually done that, but it doesn't matter what you do. It matters what you feel like you're going to do, what you intuitively want to do. All of you 27 people who go into fight mode, it doesn't mean that you get into fist fights on a regular basis, but it means that that's more intuitively what comes naturally or you lean into. Thank you for your responses, and those of you who put it in the chat, awesome. So this is another introspective question. What are some common threads about times when you feel unsafe? This is one I'm going to invite you not to put in the chat, because this might be something that is a little too personal and vulnerable. I'm not going to tell you not to, but I'm going to invite those of you who are not doing the poll everywhere to not respond in the chat. Again, do what you want. We will do a word cloud in just a moment. So think about, for you, what is common about the times when you feel unsafe? Like, is it about simply going too fast? Like, I really feel unsafe when my partner isn't behind the wheel and I'm in the passenger seat and she drives like a nutcase, and that makes me feel unsafe. Or is it about a more deep level of loss of power and control, that when somebody tells me what to do, that makes me feel unsafe? Or is it when someone's attacking me, when someone's yelling at me? I've had this happen when I've had to confront parents in our outpatient clinic and had to deal with their behaviors. And I've had people get up and get in my face and go toe to toe with me and definitely makes me feel like I'm being attacked? Or is there a certain trigger or place or person that seems to be that common thread for you? So this is a word cloud. So I invite you to respond. If you're texting your response in, or doing it, typing it. I think this is a word cloud. I'm not sure how I had this set up. We'll see. Yes, it is a word cloud. So if you text in a word like lost control, it takes it as two separate words. So either slam it together, put an underscore or a hyphen so that it will be considered one word. Loss of control seems to be pretty popular. The bigger the word, the more times it's been submitted. We have feeling threatened, when I'm being attacked, someone being in your space, those boundaries, having no control, feeling powerless, feeling defeated. About trust. Unfamiliar situations, interesting. Feeling trapped, feeling helpless. Unfamiliar situations, yeah. Unpredictability. Feeling threatened, being yelled at. Fatigue, that's an interesting. Someone put that they feel unsafe when they feel fatigued, when they're not at their best. Great responses, thank you very much. When people are correcting. Another moment for people to respond. Anger or aggression. Feeling anxious. Good. I think we have a few other word clouds that are coming up soon. You've all definitely have the hang of this. When you're attacked or encounter aggression, being doubted by a loved one. That's really tender. Thank you for sharing. Okay. I'm glad that so many of you are able to participate in this. Okay. So what do we do to calm these safety networks? So 3 things that we can fundamentally do here. We want to create positive neural pathways, and we're going to unpack that. We want to ask questions and kind of be a behavior detective about our own behavior and the behavior of other people. And then we need to develop a crisis plan. Okay? So positive neural pathways, asking questions, and developing a crisis plan. That's how we calm those safety networks. What do I mean by creating and reinforcing a positive neural pathway? How do I do that? What are we really talking about there? We're talking about exercising the brain. We're talking about exercising the brain and helping it have positive experiences. And we can do that through simple things, obvious, things like hugs, nature, art, laughter, music, being with your pets. These are ways that we create positive neural pathways in our brain. And because we know that the brain likes to travel the same pathways again and again. And if I experience a lot of bad experiences, then I am more likely to go to whatever my response was to those bad experiences. Vice versa, if I experience good things, then I can respond to that, and I'm more likely to experience good things in the future. So this is on the bottom right-hand corner. That's the reference to the book that I referred to earlier, Lisa Feldman Barrett, the book How Emotions Are Made. She talks about threat predictions and safety predictions. And I think this is really relevant, especially for these neural pathways that we're trying to build that we just referred to. So I have my experience of sensory input. Let's say I'm in a threat situation. So I'm in an environment where someone is yelling at me, or any of the other things that were on the previous slide. Someone's being aggressive. I have a loved one doubting me, whatever that might be. So I have the sensory input, let's just say, of someone yelling at me, someone getting in my face, being aggressive. That leads to what we refer to as statistical predictions. And statistical predictions means that my brain is not a reactive brain. Our brains are not reactive. The most modern neuroscience, which Lisa Feldman Barrett is on the cutting edge of, the more modern neuroscience doesn't say that our brain is reactive. It's barely even responding. What it's really doing is predicting. So it's this predictive brain theory model. So what my brain does is it goes back into my history And it says, what's my experience been like when someone has yelled at me, cursed at me, gotten in my face, been aggressive, whatever that might be. So I look back at my history and I look back at what my events have been. And I take that content and then I make a prediction about what's going to happen in this moment. And if I look back at my history and I identify anger and cursing and raised voice and yelling at me, things like that, get into my space. If I look back at my history and say that was a threat then I'm going to look at my present and say that's a threat now. Does that make sense? That's a threat now. So then I take that statistical prediction and that makes my body respond. So interoception is my internal sense of the world, my internal sensory experience of the world. And about 80% of our sensory world is internal. We don't think about that. We think about what our eyes and are doing and what I feel in my hands and what I hear. But about 80% of my sensory world is internal. And that's what we call interoception. So if I'm predicting threat in this moment, then I'm going to look at my interoception and it's going to be unbalanced because my stomach is getting tight, my shoulders are getting tight, my fists are getting clenched, my face is feeling hot, all this sensory experience that I'm responding to. And that leads to survival response. At the bottom there, fight, flight, freeze. What am I doing there? How am I responding? I need to survive, so my body wants to go into survival mode. My amygdala fires, cortisol and adrenaline come fire through my HPA axis, and that leads me to these survival responses. Whether it's hyper-aroused or hypo-aroused, we go into these survival responses, fight, flight, or freeze. That leads to inherently an energy drain because it takes a lot of energy to go into this survival mode. So it drains my energy, and unfortunately, that reinforces the fact that this event was a bad thing. So now tomorrow, I've been reinforced for that. So tomorrow, if I have somebody get in my face and yell at me, I look back at my history and now tomorrow, my history includes that encounter today, right? So that reinforces this cycle that ends up predicting threat. And if I have bad experiences and bad history or conflicted history, then in the present and future, I'm more likely to predict threat. On the converse, we can make safety predictions. And that's if I have the sensory input of someone yelling at me, someone getting in my face, same exact event. And then I can look back at my history and say, I've been able to walk away from these experiences, or I've been able to ask for help, or I've been able to de-escalate the situation. I've been able to, whatever it is, whatever that skill is, that I used in my history or the event is, maybe somebody helps me. When I get into these kind of experiences, I have people who love me and care about me and will help me. I work in a good team and someone will come and help me and support me. And if I look into my history and that's what the reality is or my experience is, then I look in the present and I work to modify my predictions or predict that I'm going to experience safety. That leads to a balanced interoception because now my brain predicts safety, so my body is calm. My body doesn't have all those tensions and anxieties and unbalancedness. So that leads to connection and engagement. I'm able to be myself and engage in what I need to. I'm able to be in my connecting brain and learning brain, which is a good thing. And those replenish me, which goes to reinforcing the fact that somebody getting in my face is not the end of the world. Somebody getting in my face, I'm not out of control. I can do something about that and I can step into safety. So these predictions are really important to understanding because I'll go back to, I should have, apologies for that. I can go back to these positive neural pathways and these behaviors here. Even if I have bad experiences in my past, I can't ever change my past. What I can do is change my present. And if I change my present, then tomorrow, today is in my past. So what we want to do is reinforce. That's what we talk about with these positive neural networks, neural pathways, because what I'm doing is reinforcing the fact that I'm experiencing good things, that I am creating a history of good things that's going to outweigh the history of the negative things. So that's those positive neural pathways. Our brains like to travel fast on those pathways. And our brains build out our neural pathways and our neural networks in ways that promote speed. promote the speed of these pathways that when somebody gets in my face and I go to aggression, or someone gets in my face and I go into survival mode, that pathway, if I travel it a lot, then that pathway gets reinforced in my brain and we go faster that way. Which means I need to practice traveling the pathway of walking away. I need to practice traveling the pathway of asking for help, because if I do that, then that pathway will get stronger, thereby faster, and I'll be more prone to get there. And the less I go to aggression or survival response, then that pathway is slower, so I'm less likely to go there. Second here in how we calm that safety brain is asking questions. And part of that is becoming a behavior detective. And that's we're talking about here about self and others. That if I'm a behavior detective, which we'll talk about in more depth in a future workshop, I believe in April, if I'm a behavior detective, I'm looking at other people's behaviors and I'm looking at my own, and I'm trying to figure out if they're congruent, if they make sense. What is going on here? And are they all fitting together in a good way? I need to learn about myself. How do I react when I get stressed? How do I react when I'm in an unsafe situation? How do I react, and understanding that reaction? Which goes back to my questions before about what's your go-to, what are you more likely to do if you're in survival response, if you feel threatened, if you feel unsafe? Are you more likely to go into fight or flight or freeze, or maybe something else, or maybe you're not sure? But learning about ourselves promotes that safety and helps to calm that safety brain. Evaluating your safety and really engaging our thinking brain is really important with this, which is hard to do when I'm really in survival mode. So we have to do this early and in a preventative way. That if I feel like I'm starting to get in an unsafe situation, that evaluation, what I'm doing there, my amygdala, my limbic system, my downstairs brain, that's the part of our brain that gets fired up and responds to threat. And if I'm in my threat response survival brain, then I'm not able to do good problem solving and thinking about consequences and relationship building and learning. But if I can engage early in an upstairs brain, if I can engage my prefrontal cortex, my cortical brain, in order to really critically think about, okay, I'm getting on this roller coaster, it looks really scary. But you know what? I've never heard of anyone dying on this roller coaster. And as a matter of fact, I'm seeing a lot of people getting off that roller coaster who don't look like they're dead. Thereby, I wonder if maybe if I got on it, it might not be a comfortable thing for me, but I might not die. It might be an actual, at least physically, a safe thing to do, even though it might be emotionally unsafe. So if I take that thinking and I move it from my limbic system, which is like, oh my goodness, that's a really long drop, they're going really fast, I don't want to do that at all. And we take that and move it up into our cortical, logical, prefrontal cortex brain, and I start evaluating it, that I can stay in that upstairs brain and do some good learning about it. And that's part of those asking questions. Is this a true threat or just a perceived threat? And again, that's a question for people to ask themselves, because they might be able to change their own perceptions of it as they start logicking through that. So asking questions is the second part of that. And then having a crisis plan, because sometimes we don't get to do the preventative work. So we have to have a crisis plan in order to find out how we can respond to things. Sometimes we just need to separate ourselves from whatever that safety threat is. We just need to move and do something else. And sometimes we don't have the opportunity to do that, but when we do, sometimes that's the right thing. That somebody's getting up in my face and arguing with me, I just need to move. Because sometimes we need to move it or lose it. Because if I'm not able to keep my upstairs brain online, if I'm not able to stay calm, then being in survival brain is not going to help me get through this situation in the way that I'm going to not regret later. Deep breathing, one of the best ways to regulate ourselves and deal with crisis and try to promote ourselves out of that downstairs brain and into that upstairs cortical brain, is deep breathing. When I breathe in, I stimulate my sympathetic nervous system, which actually is part of what some people call the fight and flight nervous system. It actually makes my heart rate go faster and my lungs dilate. It actually is not calming at all. We talked about this last month. When I breathe out, I stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. And when I do that, when I breathe out, I'm actually stimulating that rest and digest nervous system, which helps me to be calm, which is why most good breathing practices will breathe in and then spend longer breathing out. which promotes that parasympathetic nervous system response and promotes that relaxation. Visualization is another way to deal with things in a crisis. If I can't get out of it, if my job is to be at that front desk receptionist job, or I am at the cash register at McDonald's and somebody's getting in my face, somebody's being aggressive, or somebody's really frustrating me, I don't have the luxury of leaving and going to separate myself, doing other activities. I have to do something in that moment, which might be something as simple as deep breathing, visualization, so that I can get through this moment in a healthy way. Dialectical behavioral therapy. Some of you may be experienced, well-versed in DBT, or dialectical behavioral therapy. They have tons of acronyms in DBT, and one of them is TIP, and this is how to deal in a crisis moment. This is really interesting. So the first is temperature. You need to not only take your own temperature, but sometimes we need to regulate our own temperature. Could be something as simple as going into the bathroom and splashing water in your face to kind of jar you out of that moment, to be able to validate your own physical experience, to be able to deal with that crisis moment, okay? So that could be about regulating my temperature. The second is if I'm having intense emotions, sometimes my physiological experience needs to match that or mirror that. So if I'm feeling a whole lot of feelings and energy inside, I might need to go do some sort of intense exercise, because that's going to help diffuse some of that energy, thereby help diffuse some of those emotions. So in that crisis moment, to be able to engage in that intense exercise can be really good. Paced breathing is really good, because anytime we breathe, we'll talk about regulation as part of our resilience model in a few minutes, but inherent in good regulation is rhythm. Almost every element of good regulatory behavior that I can engage in is going to have rhythm to it. So engaging in paced breathing, trying to slow that breathing down, can be very effective. And then muscle relaxation, being able to do a good body scan, if we have the luxury to do that, being able to do a good body scan. Sometimes that might be tense up your shoulders for 5 or 10 seconds and then relax them. Tense up your arms for 5 or 10 seconds and then relax them. We can do that in a bilateral way with paired, and do that in a good, effective way. Because if we tense those muscles up, we can help them come to a greater level of relaxation. And then another part of that crisis plan oftentimes is engaging our sensory brain. Because when I'm in survival brain, our survival brain is also has a lot to do with our sensory brain. So if I can engage in behaviors and interactions with my sensory brain, I can help ground myself and help bring myself back to a functional level. So that might be about just looking on the horizon and looking to see what I see and identifying those things and really being mindful of those things. It might be taking a moment to be mindful about the sounds that I hear, whether that car passing by on the road, that bird that's chirping in the tree outside, things like that. Taste, touch, smell, same kind of things. Movement is a wonderful sensory experience. And again, move it or lose it. Sometimes we just need to get that movement on, and that's a great thing. So that movement. And then proprioceptive pressure goes along with movement. It's about the sensation we have in our joints. But that proprioceptive pressure is also about that weighted blanket. It's about cuddling up under those 3 quilts in my bed and feeling the weight of those quilts and blankets on top of me. And that's a comforting, securing kind of way to feel. And that can be very nurturing and promote resilience. So it's another word cloud. What do you find useful to do or to engage in to help other people feel safe? What kind of things have you done or used, or tools that you've utilized to help other people feel safe? Breathing, good. Listening can be really good to validate someone's experience, to give empathy, to listen to them in a real active way can be wonderful. Touch. I think touch goes along with knowing their triggers, because touch could be certainly triggering for some people, but can be very nurturing and promote safety for others. Hugs. Think about what we do with our kids, with our young kids when they're scared of a nightmare or about that shot that they're going to get at the doctor's office, whatever that might be. Just giving a good hug can be a wonderful, wonderful thing. Creating a safety plan, reassurance, controlled voice. Planning, definitely. Not letting the emergency crisis come. Smiling and laughing, eye contact. Music, we'll talk about that as we talk about regulation and resilience. Counting to 10. Counting to 10 can be a good thing what we want to do is make sure that counting to 10 is not just a distraction, because there are a lot of other things that we can do to really promote safety in a more effective way. But that's good. It's a good tool. Good to have a lot of tools. Positive affirmations. Being reassuring. Singing or humming. Vibrations. Definitely those vibrations. Vibrations go back to rhythm. It's that rhythm that you're feeling in your lips when you hum. I will take these word clouds and take screenshots of them and put them in that Google Drive folder that you'll get when you go to that childsavers.link/Cornell that we shared with you earlier. So you can go back and look at these, because there might be some tools here that you might not have thought about. Being reassuring, most definitely. I'm going to move forward here. So we had self-care, which only keeps me at baseline, We have trauma and stress that might dip us down. We have self-soothing behaviors and restoration that we can use to bring us back up. But then we can use resilience, because resilience will help boost us up. Resilience is not self-care, and resilience is not inherently safety seeking. If I'm not already safe, then I can't really work on my resilience. Resilience helps us boost up to a new baseline. So these are the 5 building blocks of resilience. Again, we're going to unpack these again next month, as we really talk about how to teach these, which also goes to operationalizing them and living into them ourselves. But attachment, regulation, competence and self-esteem, gratitude, and hope. Attachment is obvious. It's about relationships. It's about connections. Those connections might be intimate. Those connections might be casual. Research shows that we all need positive relationships and attachments. And if you don't have them, then you're much more likely to not have good positive outcomes in your life. Think about how often when we hear about stories in the news or other places about people who do big bad things in our world, or maybe people in your community, maybe people in your workplace, kids in your school, things like that. So often those people who have the worst behaviors are the people who have the least attachments, relationships, positive connections. So we need those in our lives. We all need those in our lives. Research shows that if you don't have one, then you're going to have more likely to have negative outcomes. But if you have 5, you're golden. Research has shown that 5 is kind of the magic number, the tipping point over which you're not going to grow. You might be happier and have better relationships, but 5 gets you those positive outcomes in your life. Regulation, we need to do all sorts of things to regulate our mind, our emotions, as well as our body. As I said before, regulation has a lot to do with rhythm, with rhythmic activities, has a lot to do with sensory experiences. Talking to that downstairs brain, those sensory brain experiences to regulate, whether that's taking a hot bath, whether that's mindfulness and meditation, things like that. There are things that we can all do to regulate. Sometimes people need to down-regulate, which is calming down, essentially. Taking some deep breaths, being able to sit and enjoy nature, enjoy that swimming pool that this person is in, or forest bathing. There's science coming out of Japan that talks about the experience of regulation that comes from being in nature. That you spend the same 30 minutes just sitting on the couch, being mindful, spend that same 30 minutes being outside in nature, much more of a resilience fill-up for us, regulatory fill-up. But some people need to upregulate, as I mentioned before, and that might be about running, that might be about lifting heavy things. Lifting heavy things is that proprioceptive pressure that I feel in my joints and movement. Running is totally about rhythm. It's about not only the proprioceptive pressure, but it's also about running. It's about rhythm, left, right, left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, which promotes that regulation. Competence and self-esteem. You might not have inherently thought that competence and self-esteem should be a part of a model for resilience, but it is. So I need to feel good about the things that I do. I need to have enough self-esteem to know that I do things well and to know that I have a contribution to make. That could be about what I make. That could be creativity. That could be my work, being in my workplace. It could be some sort of something that's artistic in terms of being creative. It could be about, think about early COVID lockdown and how we couldn't find flour or yeast at the grocery store because everyone was buying it to go into their bread baking and then sourdough bread baking. That was about competence and self-esteem, because many of us felt like we didn't have as much impact in the world. We were removed from our workplace, we were having to do things very differently, and we were stuck in the house. And it wasn't just that I was bored, it's that I wanted to feel like I had some impact in the world. So I'm going to work to bake, to cook, to create, to do home improvement projects, to craft, to plant a garden, to grow vegetables, because I want to feel like I have some competence. I want to feel like I'm good at something. I want to feel like I have good self-esteem. Gratitude. Gratitude is a wonderful piece about being resilient. And it's hard to find people who are truly resilient people who aren't truly grateful people, who aren't appreciative of the world around them. To be able to be appreciative of people in terms of how we express that affection, how we express that gratitude. Gratitude, research shows that gratitude, when I give gratitude, when I say thank you, it helps me in terms of my stress indicators and my and how resilient I am, but it also helps the receiver too. That gratitude is a wonderful thing to give for both the giver and the receiver. And we need to be grateful for things, and not just grateful for things in a tangential way. We need to be truly grateful for the things that we have. It's not a, it's better than this, it could be worse kind of attitude, but it needs to be true gratitude. The whole science of positive psychology, which encourages people to do things like use a gratitude journal, to write about things that I'm grateful for, or to think about how many faith traditions look at praying, look at being thankful, how much prayer life or worship life is tied up in being thankful for things. It's very important there, whether it's at worship, whether it's at before a meal, whether it's before bed, things like that, focusing on gratitude because it helps our souls. Hope, if gratitude is for today, hope is for tomorrow. Hope is about looking into the future and finding something that I'm going to focus on, that I'm going to aim for, and looking towards it. Hope is looking into that future. That hope, I take my rope and I make a lasso out of it and I throw it into the future and I pull myself forward with that hope because I have a belief that things can get better. So this model, attachment, regulation, competence, and self-esteem, gratitude and hope, this is what we've all been living into since the pandemic with all the challenges in our lives. This is what we've been living into. And the more you can do these things, the stronger we are. But it's inherent, it's incumbent upon all of us to do these things. And quite frankly, these are things that we all do on a regular basis, probably anyway. That's not a big deal. But my challenge to you, my call to you is to do these things in intentional ways. Because you might say hello to a colleague at work, at the office, or greet your kid, hey, when he comes down for breakfast in the morning. But what are you doing to intentionally pour into attachment in those relationships for both the other person and for you? What are you doing to intentionally regulate? How am I eating? How am I sleeping? How am I exercising? What am I doing for my body to honor my body's experience? Am I taking those deep breaths? Am I sitting at my work desk, workstation for hours and hours at a time and not even getting up and getting that movement on, that proprioceptive pressure? Competence and self-esteem. What am I doing to make myself feel good about what I'm doing, to have impact in the world, both in my work life as well as outside of my work life? Because we all need that. What am I grateful for? And what am I looking forward to in the future? These building blocks are about how we help others. They're also about how we help ourselves. This model for resilience is the same exact thing for self-care for me as it is for helping other people. So my question for you as we wrap up, which of these 5 do you feel is most important for you and your own resilience on a daily basis? Interesting numbers. I'm glad that they're all resonating at least with someone, which is awesome. Competence and self-esteem. We want to feel good about what we do. And going into that, in that same bucket of competence and self-esteem is also impact. Some people feel good about it just because I did it and I get to look at it. But some of us really need to feel that we have impact, that we're making a difference in the world. And I believe that many of us here on this call are helping professionals of one sort or another, and that is right in line with wanting to have impact. and how that's tied in with our self-esteem and sense of competence. Give another moment for people to respond. And Connie, that's absolutely fine if you feel like they're equally balanced. It is hard to choose, and it's kind of a false choice because these are certainly very important. But some people may feel like, yeah, you know, this one is totally for me, and the other one's totally not. All right. Different question. Which of these 5 is most difficult for you? Karen, I see your direct question in the chat, and I will answer that, I think, on the next slide. Which of these is most difficult for you? Janice talks about definitely hope, trying to lean into that hope. And hope is how we get through the rough times. Some of the other things here are kind of preventative a lot of times. Hope is something that we can do in the moment of stress. I was wondering if competence and self-esteem, because it shot up there at the beginning. It looks like being well-regulated is the challenge for many of you. Thank you. So whether we're in COVID, whether we're in other life stresses, these 5 elements, these 5 building blocks of resilience are inherently essential to helping us be resilient. We need to do that. And if we do them in very intentional ways, which is what we're going to unpack next month about how to teach these in effective ways, and also just how to live them out, that's what we're going to get into. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. As we wrap up our February challenge, as I mentioned in the beginning, the email address is cornellchallenge@gmail.com. I expect everyone to send in a response. So what is your safety anchor? Might be a place, a thing, an experience. Send us a picture, a story. And what we will do is share those with the larger community to inspire others in terms of what they're doing. We all need, and this might be a challenge for you, to think about what would my safety anchor be? Is it a picture of my spouse or partner? Is it a special place in nature? Is it, think about if you were a 3-year-old child, it might be your teddy bear that you want to hug onto. Actually, ironically, I have a teddy bear right here. It might be your teddy bear that you just want to hug onto, and that's what makes you feel secure. Or maybe it's that hug from your mom or your dad. But it could be all sorts of different things. Jane asked a question about tapping. Tapping can be a good, it's more than meditation. It's a physiological response that integrates in with the brain. We don't have time to get into that today to describe it, but I know a number of people who have really good responses with tapping. Similarly, sort of in the same bucket as hypnosis and some other things, it's a physiological kind of thing that integrates with the mind. Karen put in the chat the evaluation, which we invite everyone to do. There are going to be some quiz questions. Remember that this model for resilience is universal for everyone. It's not different for you than for me than it is for the 4-year-old or the 80-year-old. These 5 building blocks of resilience might get operationalized different for different people, but it's a universal model. So as we wrap up, we are at 4:29, and I'm going to give myself a pat on the back because that's a self-esteem boost for me because I rarely end things on time. So I will put up this for future sessions. March 11th, we have Teaching Resilience. April 8th, we have Being a Behavior Detective. And May 13th, Building Organizational and Community Networks for Resilience. All these are really going to be fun. I really look forward to these. And Corinne, sorry about that. Maybe Karen can make a modification on the quiz. It looks like one of them is not a multi-select. And the link is there on the bottom, as well as the email address, childsavers.link/Cornell, where you can find a PDF of this entire presentation, and my contact email is there as well. That is the end of my time, right on time. You're welcome to all. Thank you for the work that you're doing in your community, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. But thank you for wanting to do this and spend this hour. And hopefully what you can do is take this information and do something with it. Doesn't matter how amazing this hour was. Hopefully you think that. What matters is what you do with it. So thank you. I'm guessing everyone has the link that needs it. We have a moment or two for any questions if anyone has any who's still on. All right.